What's the most X-Files-like experience you've had in real life? There was sexual tension between me and a hot friend of mine that didn't pan out once. I have a friend who once told me about a time when he was in his teens. He slept in a bunk bed with his brother in the lower bunk. He said he dreamt a demon wearing the skin of a man threatened to kill his brother. In order to save him, he somehow managed to procure a knife and put the knife to the neck of the demon. The demon tells him, the only way to rid evil is through evil. He hesitated and woke up to find he was pressing a butcher knife under the neck of his younger brother. He was still sleeping, fortunately, but when he awoke, he told the same dream exactly, except he was attacked by his brother in the dream and said the exact same thing. The only way to rid evil is through evil. Nothing similar happened after that, and it gave him some serious issues that led him to go through psychotherapy for a while. I can't say if it's true or not. As far as I know, he made the whole thing up. But I don't think so, as he was reluctant to mention it. Growing up, my brother beat the it out of me constantly. Like, cut eyes, bloody noses, police called beatings. One day at the library I was reading a book about some tribe who believed you could go into people's dreams and cast a sickness on them. So I did all the pre-dream groundwork described in the book, and that night I went to sleep and had a dream. In the dream I was at one end of a long road and my brother was at the other end. I lifted my hand and pointed at him. I cast a sickness on you. The next day we're watching TV and he said, I feel like it. You have mono. I don't even know why I thought of that, but it was the first thing that came to mind. Duck you, which was all he said, and the conversation was over. A week later it turns out he did have mono. I was freaked out. I was pretty sure I was a witch and would burn in hell. Compound matters. I had a friend whose dad was a professor. We'd get stoned with him and he'd always tell me random facts. I'm at his house and he starts telling me about this tribe that went in people's dreams and cast sickness. I was paranoid as duck that people would learn this horrible thing I did. Now that I'm not 15 and an idiot, I assume it was just the creepiest coincidence ever. Ghost car. I worked the overnight shift at an AM radio station back in the 90s. Saw a car come down the driveway to the parking lot. Went out to see who it was and the car was just gone. I would have seen if it had turned around or backed out. Thought I was going nuts until the announcer strolled out of the studio and said, what happened to that car? I driving down the highway about 3 AM when a semi-truck pulled alongside me, then swerved into my lane, running me off the road and down a very steep incline. I remember going over, I gunned the engine, why I don't know. But as I was going downhill I kept telling myself to step on the brake. I couldn't move, it was like someone was holding my foot down. And I heard this voice tell me, okay, now you can step on the brake. Neither my infant daughter nor myself were injured, and the only damage to the car was a hole in the oil pan. Both the tow truck and the highway patrol officer was incredulous that I didn't roll the car. They told me if I had tried to stop any sooner than I did I would have probably killed us both. Nothing too crazy, but definitely creeped my wife and I out. We have a Wii. The sensor bar is on the TV stand directly in front of the TV, as is anyone's. We don't have the cord wrapped up or anything, it just hangs behind the TV in a jumble. One night we were watching TV cuddling on the couch, when suddenly, the Wii sensor bar literally flies across the room till it got to the end of its length and fell to the floor. Like someone had grabbed it and chucked it across the room. We could find no explanation for this whatsoever. We had a cat and a dog at the time, but cat was sleeping in another room, and dog was on the couch with us. We did have several birthday cards on top of the TV on display, and one of them was on the ground. So the only thing I could think was that somehow we missed the card falling and it hit the cord and viola. I tried for 10 minutes to throw that card as hard as I could at that cord, and it didn't even move the bar from its place on the TV stand. Eventually we just chalked it up to WTF and moved on, but it was definitely weird. I stole a picture from one of the historic houses in Old Town San Diego on Halloween for fun with my girlfriend. Picture was painted in the 1800s. It was Jesus praying in a hallway. Upon closer examination there was an alternate black devil looking Jesus hidden by the shadows of the painting. Took it home and put it in the closet. Randomly on nights I would smell the worst smell in the world and wake up and see what looked like a black smoke cloud. I moved 3 times and still saw the same shit. Finally my roommate saw the same thing, so I knew I wasn't crazy. Long story short, I brought the picture back to where I got it and told one of the employees what I did and apologized, and she replied, "Don't worry, they always come back to us." This was the house. I walked the 2 miles home from my closing shift at Taco Bell. The whole time I felt uneasy. When I get home I have a brief moment of relief as I shut and lock the door. I still lived with my folks back then in their split foyer house. The basement on the front of the house was half underground, while the back is not. So at the entryway I turn on the basement light for a second to make sure the floor is clear of my brother's toys. After confirming it was, I turned off the light and walked down the stairs. Sometimes you get that sensation in the corner of your eye that something's there, and before you realize what's going on, you're staring something outside the window. I only saw glowing red eyes staring back at me. I was frozen. It had to have been over 7 feet tall. Then I bolted into my room, got under the covers and stayed there for a few minutes hoping I was just imagining it. Then the back porch door opened, and my dog, who was kenneled right next to the inside door to that same porch, starts going upbeat. Thank God for that, I thought, as I heard the porch door open and close again. TLDR, when I was a kid, a monster almost got me, but my dog chased it off. My wife calling my name. Nothing unusual about that, except that I did not hear it with my ears, as I was listening to Led Zeppelin's In My Time of Dying on the stereo, and it was cranked up. I heard it in my mind. I walked to the bathroom as I knew my wife was taking a bath. I found her face down in the water. She was unconscious, having suffered an epileptic seizure. Fortunately, I found her in time. When I was younger I was really into looking at creepy places with my friends. Mostly would find nothing, just strange shadows or sounds that we would convince ourselves was much more. One night we went down to Witch Road, as we heard there was a strange cabin in the woods that was supposedly terrifying. Generally we did a lot of research on these places to learn about them, what other people have seen or experienced. But this time we did none of that. Found the address, printed out the MapQuest directions and took on the road. The road is truly out in the middle of nowhere surrounded by woods. It was about 8:15 midsummer when we parked on the side of the road just as it was turning dusk. We got out of the car and headed to the trunk to get our flashlights and backpacks. We rounded the end of the car and I saw the cabin. I gestured to my friends to look at the cabin. Just then we saw what looked to be an orb that was slowly moving towards us. It was far enough in the distance that we couldn't make out distinctly what the shape was. It wasn't scary, didn't make me anxious. It did the opposite. I was incredibly intrigued and curious. I started walking into the woods, leaving behind my backpack and flashlight. My friends closely followed. Breaking the silence, we heard a crashing through the woods as a man appeared running towards us holding a lantern and telling us that we had to leave. We asked no questions and headed back to the car. The adventure was over. We were all silent and in a daze driving away, until my friend said, "Wait, did that guy have a ducking lantern? What year is he from?" Still a strange weird moment in my life. Every few weeks my girlfriend or I will see STCH sight of colorful lights moving past our 3rd story apartment window at night. I, the Scully of the relationship, am convinced it is some trick of the light, with the police car's flashing lights reflecting off of something and bouncing back to our window. My girlfriend is certain that someone is flying a drone past our window to spy on us. I always run out to check as soon as I see the lights, but I never see a drone. The lights look like a drone, but they move too fast and they move through tree branches, so I don't think it's a drone. It's probably aliens though. 6 years ago, I was hanging out with my siblings in our yard during a clear, sunny day around high noon, and I suddenly caught something moving in the sky out of the corner of my eye. When I turned to get a better look, I couldn't reconcile what the duck I was seeing. It was a metal cube just gliding through the air pretty high up. I proceeded to absolutely lose my it and my sibs saw it as well before it disappeared behind some trees. We ran to the other side of the trees but it was already gone. Still creeps me out to think about. We did live right next to a military base, so make of that what you will. Thing had all the aerodynamics of a literal brick though. Edit. Holy at my inbox earlier today this was at like 15 upvotes and I figured it would get buried. Thanks all. I'll try to reply to people in the morning. A lot of your comments gave me a good chuckle. I was 6 and my brother was 10. We had a 21-year-old foster brother who lived with us off and on. One night I woke up to see him standing in the doorway of my room, checking on me. I said his name in a questioning voice. He said, "It's okay. Go back to sleep." Around the same time, my brother woke up in tears. He said he'd had a dream about a knight standing on a hill, and it made him feel very sad. Turns out our brother died in a car crash that evening. I worked for 5 years in a windowless office in the basement once. Every year on my birthday for the first 20 years of my life I woke up at the exact time I was born. 5:56 am estate. When I was stationed in the UK I woke up at 10:56 am and thought, "Ha, broke the streak," until I realized I was 5 hours ahead. I was digging a grave for a passed on pet in the woods behind my house. I leaned on my shovel to stop for a break. I saw some kind of animal dart in front of me and leaned forward to look at it closely. It had vanished. Next thing I knew, I woke up lying on the ground and for some reason didn't worry about it. I just got up and began digging again. It was a hot summer in the mountains, so when I got weak and exhausted a little later I figured I was getting heat exhaustion. So I went back to my mom's house to cool off. She freaked out because I was covered in blood. I had a big skip mark cut on the very top of my scalp, like something very sharp had skipped across my head like a skipping stone. It was in the middle of a property that backs to a big multi-county lake a mile or two back, and on other sides was just dense forest my family owned. No idea what it was. Edit. I was 11 when this happened. Maybe around 2006-7? I saw my mom holding my baby sister in her arms and taking her to bed. Not weird, right? My mom was still pregnant with my sister at that time. I went to kitchen and saw her still in there. Still pregnant. I didn't even bother going to bedroom to see who just went in there. Just nope. Stay in living room and mind my own business. Background. There's a compound near where I grew up that is a supposedly decommissioned 8-ant Cold War communication center. It sits at the end of a dead-end road isolated from any houses nearby. On the outside it looks like a small, mundane 2-story building. Nothing exciting at all, until you find out the building is actually many stories deeper. The entire building rests on a bed of springs to absorb shock from explosions and features an underground parking structure adjacent. Over the years there have been theories that it was a missile silo, UFO research center, and something about a dark cloud full of lightning hovering just above it on an otherwise clear day. The X-Files part. Prior to decommission, you could drive down that road until you almost reached a guard station. I say almost because doing so resulted in being engulfed in floodlights with a military type security team armed with assault rifles demanding you turn around immediately. As far as I know, no one to this day knows what really went on there or what the inside looks like. Here's a few links if anyone wants to know more. Edit. I was last minute Christmas shopping and this kinda blew up. Super surprised at all the people who could basically be my neighbors. Which is awesome. So, field trip anyone? Edit 2. Wish me luck. Edit 3. Drove down this dirt road once. About 15 miles down the road a black SUV pulled out of nowhere. A few minutes of driving later I seen another black SUV parked a ways ahead. I turned my it around and bailed. Oh okay. This one scarred me for a couple of months. When I was in high school, a guy and I got into an argument. He socked me in the jaw and started to fall to the floor, and I hit the floor. I instantly transported to a dinner table at which I was an adult. There was a woman sitting across from me, with a toddler boy and a preteen girl. I got a good look of my surroundings, a relatively modern house, with what looked like 2 floors. I felt like I belonged here, like I had some sort of emotional connection with all the people in the room, especially the kids. Then, a woman, my wife, asked me a question. When I opened my mouth, I threw up all over the table and woke up in a stretcher in an ambulance. Hours later, I found out I just had a minor concussion. For a while, I felt like I left a part of my life behind, even if it was only for a bleak moment in that world. To this day, I can still clearly remember all their faces and what the house looked like. We were working in a fairly secure oil field in Texas, and they were like, do not explore. Go straight to your destination. If you divert you will be banned for life. So we asked our buddy if they were hiding Bigfoot or Chupacabra and he winked at us. The truth is out there, people. I was sitting out back at my old place at about 4 AM during the summer. There were some railroad tracks behind the app buildings. I was sitting parallel to the tracks, just drinking beer and listening to music through some headphones. All of a sudden I see something in my peripheral vision. I turn my head and see this gold glowing humanoid figure is walking on the tracks. It looked like a human, but with no discernible features, and it was glowing gold. I had my eyes on it for about a second before it went behind some trees. It's the only paranormal experience I've had that I haven't been able to find an explanation for. Then again, I was pretty sauced by this point, so it takes away from my credibility, but I usually don't see glowing figures while drinking. Late to the party, but I'll share anyways. One day I'm over at a friend's house and we go into the kitchen to do something. Both him and I are moving around the kitchen. All of a sudden we hear a pop and then there is a small spot of orange gooey stuff on my friend's shirt. To this day we have no idea what it was. Looked around the entire kitchen and didn't find anything that looked similar to the goo. We just chalked it up to an interdimensional being gizzing on my friend. I once had a dream of this girl I was friends with. She came to me in a dark room, asked me to protect her. I wrapped my arms around her and was warped over top of her in a car. She was sleeping and the street lights kept flashing upon her face and everything started spinning and all I could hear was screaming until bam, and I woke up covered in scratches. Blinding headache. Could barely get out of bed. My back and ribs hurt so bad I could hardly breathe. Had a mouth full of blood. I got online and messaged her every single detail. 2 days later she messaged back telling me that's the creepiest ducking thing she's ever read and couldn't believe it. She was on a car trip to North Carolina with a friend and he fell asleep at the wheel and the car rolled into the woods and hit a tree. He spent 6 months in the hospital. She was only there for a week. She's only like 4'11", 120 pounds. It's a miracle she wasn't hurt worse. Edit. Sweet 600 likes breaks my record. I've actually had quite a few crazy ass dreams that came true. 2 quite significant events, and also a couple UFO experiences. My boss told me he didn't believe me. Last time, my brother was helping me across the country. We borrowed a van and loaded everything up for the last trip. Just before we left I checked my watch and called my GF that we would be hitting the road soon. My brother checked the kitchen clock but only told me later he did. We set out but couldn't do more than 80 km/h because of the load. When we took the off-ramp of my new city my brother told me he couldn't remember the trip. When I thought about it, neither could I. We both thought we were tired and thought nothing of it. However, when we arrived at my new house my GF asked if I broke the speed limit because we were almost an hour early. When retracing the route, my brother and I both agreed that we can remember passing a certain gas station and nothing thereafter, until the off-ramp. To this day we have no clue what happened during that hour missing or how we could have traveled that fast. Not with any car or van at least. Now at the beginning I wrote we both independently checked for time. This is important for us because one time source could have been wrong but not both. Also I called before we left which limits the time we could use to travel. Since then we have never experienced any weirdness like it or otherwise. I don't have any weird memories or dreams. No piece of metal lodge under my skin. etc. Just an hour I lost. When I was a child, while waiting for the bus I was very nearly attacked by the biggest, blackest, meanest dog I have ever seen. Until an equally big white dog came out of nowhere to my defense while I ran back inside. It has made me think a lot about angels and demons. And I have never been sure what to believe since it happened. Oh boy, this still wigs me out. I was driving back from a 16-hour road trip to see family and I was about an hour from home. The whole trip was just 4 days long. So I was pretty sleep deprived and had been driving by myself with very few stops. I was cruising on the highway and in front of me was a tunnel through the mountains. I hadn't driven through a tunnel on the way out of the state, so I became alarmed I had been driving the wrong way. I checked my GPS but had no signal on my phone. Unusual. The whole trip I normally have signal. I immediately took the exit before the tunnel to get my bearings. It was a big circle exit and at the end was a 4-way stop with a flashing traffic light. I took a left and the only thing around was a small 50s style diner and a parking lot. All the lights were off in the diner, obviously closed, but the parking lot was full of cars, like, packed. There were old classic cars and new cars but there was not a single soul to be seen. It was around 3 AM, so I didn't expect a crowd. But there wasn't a hotel or homes nearby, just a closed diner and parking lot full of cars. I didn't even slow down. I ducking noped out of there so hard, pulled a U-E-Y in the street and drove back to the on-ramp to the highway. Once I was back on the highway I drove for about 30 minutes until the GPS came back. I was actually pretty close to home. My friend and I once drove back to try and find the diner but we never could find it, or the tunnel. I like to think that if I would have pulled into the parking lot my car might have been added to the collection and no one would have seen me again. We're all convinced that something is going on in the flat above the one my parents have lived in since 2002. For starters, all of us, me, my siblings, our parents, as well as some of our neighbors, occasionally heard furniture being dragged across the floor when no one was currently living there. Sometimes we'd hear the footfalls of a running child as well. There is also the fact that in the years since we moved there, 2 different married couples lived there, both divorced within a year. A third couple came the brink of divorce to the point where they stopped living together for a while. She went to her parents' home I think and he also went to stay somewhere else. Apparently in their time away they mended things and, after hearing stories about that flat, decided to move out. No idea if they're still together as of now. Actually before I moved out in 2009 a couple was remodeling it. Apparently spent a ton of money on it but their relationship fell apart and they never got married. Edit. Grammar. My close friend lived in Nick, and she was driving with some cousins and got in an accident. This is about 2 AM Sunday morning. I'm dead sleep. I dreamt the entire crash, and the scream from when they hit the median woke me up. It sounded like she was right next to me, screaming in my ear. As I got my phone to call her and check, she called me. I told her bits and pieces of what I had seen, but she figured I had guessed everything, until I described the dress she had on, and she freaked out because she had never shown me the dress. She had just bought it, and I even knew theirs was a tag still on it. I saw Bon Jovi in my Cinnamon Toast Crunch bowl once. In my hometown area there is a ghost story about a large grey bull that roams the local farms and bellows once seen only to vanish into thin air. When I was a boy in the Scouts I heard that story at a meeting and it made my blood run cold and gave a distinct taste of salt in my mouth. One of my earlier memories was being in the bottom of our fields at home and walking back uphill towards our house. I looked up and in front of me was a gigantic greyish blue bull standing between me and the house. I had never seen it before and we didn't have cows, so when it bellowed I turned tail and ran down through the field. When I looked back behind me, in a wide open field with nowhere to go, it was gone. My grandmother didn't believe me of course, but years later she was our dear mother, and when that story was being told I looked up at her across the room and she was already looking at me and white as a ghost.